It's a very, very special time to be working in customer support. The old playbook is dying, or maybe it's already dead, and the new one isn't fully written yet. There's a million opportunities. There's a lot of excitement for the possibilities. I've been consulting for the last couple of years and talking to so many support leaders, so many startup founders, and the story is kind of always the same. It starts with like, we have this tool, but it doesn't really work for what we need. There's a lot of pressure towards, here's a new thing that you should adopt, but there's no clarity around the why, the results, and like what the next steps are. So blanket solutions don't really work. The best teams are the ones who are really thinking outside of these guardrails and just like extending their powers.
Susanna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate the invite, and I'm just excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many different directions that we can go, but I wanted to actually start us with something I saw you post on LinkedIn not long ago that feels like it really captures kind of the moment of where we are in the world of customer support. You posted, support isn't about replies to tickets, it's about removing the need for them. And I feel like that is such a growth from maybe where we were even a couple years ago. And so I'm wondering if you could go back and talk to Susanna in the early 2010s, I think you're like Airbnb days, and share that sentiment. Like, how would she react back then? Like, how has this changed in your time in the world of support?
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazing question, because I truly think that Susanna 15 years ago would have probably thought I was absolutely crazy. And not because I disagree, like philosophically or like fundamentally. I think everyone can agree that, no one wants to really contact support. Like, no issues is better than having issues. But I think it was just a completely different world at Airbnb. Like Airbnb support was very B2C, very human. It's, I think, still today, not usually something like, help me change my email address. It's more like, hey, I'm locked out of my Airbnb, or the host didn't show up and now my family is at 2 a.m. locked outside in the rain. Oh, and I have a baby. Oh, and we have no money for a hotel. And you get the point, right? So don't get me wrong too, like lots of technical issues, but I think those would get like very, very easily overshadowed by just like trust and safety issues. And that was really what would make or break like that experience. And so, yeah, if I went back in time and I told myself, hey, support isn't just about like replying to tickets, it's actually about like removing the needs for them, I'd probably be like, well, try saying that to a person on the phone who called in because they don't feel safe in their Airbnb or whatever, right? So I have like huge respect for the teams that would support those guests and hosts like every single day. My team at Airbnb was focused on payments issues, so our job was a lot more technical. And in that case, yes, there was like a lot that could have been avoided for sure. So I think that was like my real introduction to what I would call like operational excellence at scale, and like learning how to build like those systems, and that we need to build those systems that can handle the volume without breaking. And I think that was, both a blessing and a curse, to be honest. For a very long time, I thought like customer support was what happened only like after there was an issue. So that's what I optimized for. That's what my team optimized for. Whether that was like better ticketing systems, more training, better tagging, faster responses. And I don't think that's wrong, right? Because especially at a company like Airbnb, where customer support still like will make or break that user experience, I think that's what they need to do. And so, I mean, I joined Loom, I was kind of like forced to rethink that. And all of a sudden, like a support request wasn't just like a matter of safety. Like no one was really on the street in the middle of the night because Loom was broken, or at least I hope so, right? But the volume was like still crazy. Like our contact rate was probably like 3 or 4%, which doesn't seem a lot, but when you're adding thousands of new users every single day, I'm sure from, working at Jam, and it's, at the time it was only me doing support, it just can add up really quickly. And since I was like the first customer facing hire, I was doing everything, I really had to like rethink that experience, because I wasn't inheriting a support function. I wasn't being, hired into it. I was really building it from scratch. So that really, really forced me to think about my life, really, because why did we have so many tickets? Like, why was I spending, my entire day, replying to the users? And I'm sure these users would prefer not to contact support at all and, have to wait 2 or 3 days for me to reply to a simple question. And so that's how I started seeing support as more than a reactive function. Every question was a signal. My job really wasn't to answer the question, but it was to make sure that the question never needed to be asked again.
If we oversimplify the conversation today, it's that kind of like technology versus human. What is the right thing for the customer? Like, how do you thread those two things together? Like, what, I guess, is there something in your experience at Loom where you thought, yeah, not only do I have to do this at scale, but this is actually, I can create a better experience for the end user with this technology? Or take me through a little bit of how those two things weave together.
Absolutely. I think that at Airbnb I was kind of like really, really embedded in like the machine, so to say, to or so to speak, to see how support can play like that really impactful role. But at Loom, I grew to like really appreciate the fact that I was coming from Airbnb with kind of like a hospitality mindset, because that's what we were trained for at Airbnb. It wasn't really like, here's how to do tech support. It was more so like, Disney has the best customer support in the world. Let's do like them. Like Zappos, they literally wrote the book on like how to deliver the best possible customer support experience. Let's do like them. And so bringing that like hospitality mindset into Loom, even though it was, very much like B2B. At the time, it was kind of B2C, but eventually led into B2B. I thought it was a huge advantage for me because I wasn't thinking technically, but then I was forced to do that. But I can't unlearn, my hospitality training. And so I feel like that helped create a more human experience when it comes to tech support and like connect those dots between what it looks like to deliver technical support at scale, but without forgetting that, yes, these are people behind the tickets, behind the screens that we still should, make their day and like deliver that really warm experience, even if it's a technical issue. It still really, really matters and it can make or break that experience.
That resonates so much. I've been in various like customer facing roles for about 15 years now. And the one thing I always feel like I'm trying to do is when there's like an issue or an open question that is causing some kind of pain, is like, how do we show up for that person? And then everything else kind of comes thereafter. Like if you can like meet them where they are and show them kind of where you're trying to take them, even if it's a high effort, longer thing, people tend to really appreciate that approach. And I feel like the anxiety overall comes down. So it's something that I definitely feel in my experience today. If you were kind of back to my original question of like talking to Susanna and saying like, hey, welcome to 2025, where we are talking about people being product builders and starting with the technology, like how do you think you coach that person on what it means for their role today and why there's some really great opportunity in that?
That's an amazing question. I don't know
Sorry,
if I
just
would.
asking you to
Yeah.
solve the entire support question in one call.
No, I love it. I don't know if I would have like very good, or if I would have like good advice. I think like knowing what I know today and experiencing just kind of the shift that has happened in the past year, but even like 6 months, right? I started this year having no idea how to deploy like my own website, work with databases, like, pull data from an API. And now I'm doing all of that just because technology evolved in such a way where people that are non-technical, such as myself, can do that and can access that power. But 15 years ago, when I was starting to work and like trying to figure things out, I always felt so inadequate or just kind of like lacking because I didn't have like that technical knowledge. And I kept thinking, oh, I should have studied this and I should have studied that, or maybe I will study this or that when I have time. But you never really have time, and you're just kind of like, you know searching for that opportunity as the years go by. And I think I would just tell myself, hey, the moment will come where all of this is so accessible. But in the meantime, try to learn as much as possible about, systems thinking, about thinking about a problem in different ways, like not trying to, just blindly solve something, but actually think about like, why is it happening? What are the things that actually impact and determine how this evolves? And so I think just figuring that out and figuring out the steps towards a solution really teaches you how to think creatively as well, which I think is so important and something that, maybe AI is not going to help us with. That I think that we need to really, really invest in ourselves and make sure that we keep that really, um, different way of approaching problems and like from every single angle.
Systems thinking is such a great frame for like how we might want to retrain our brains for 2026 coming up shortly here. Um, as someone who's leading a support team, and these are a lot of our customers, I feel like there's this like nervous energy. Like there's a lot of opportunity, and great, we can do all these new things and impact the customers in this way, but it's so open ended that I feel like there's some anxiety in like what are the things that we should be doing. And so I'm curious if that kind of like nervous excitement, anxiety is something that you see in a lot of support leaders, or how are your peers kind of feeling in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right to call this out. The nervous energy is definitely out there, and I think it's really kind of like a mix. What I'm hearing generally, I think, falls into a couple of buckets, right? So we have the job anxiety bucket of, being afraid of losing your job, or maybe not even knowing what your job is going to look like in the future, right? Like, I've done this for the past 5, 10 years. Like, what is this role going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And then there's a different bucket, which I think is incredibly stressful, which is the executive pressure, right? So if everyone else is doing this, then we should too. And that's typically like not the best approach to adopting new technology, especially if it's not the best for like the support team or the customer, right? So like just that blind, oh, everyone is deploying a chatbot, let's do too, right? Probably not the most productive. And I think that the nervous energy is probably like extending beyond AI too. I think that we're having such an identity shift in customer support. Every year there's something new. We've had automations, self-serve, live chat. They've all had their moment. We've been talking about reactive to proactive, mindset shift for years. Support operations started to become a thing, and now everything must be AI. But AI is not going to help you if your foundations aren't right. And so, you can't just slap AI on top of broken products and hope for the best. And so all of this, I think, is redefining what customer support actually is and how support teams will change. And I truly, truly believe that like support leaders that have been really investing in the things that I just said, that, automation, documentation, building systems at scale, I think they're the ones that are going to have a really good time with AI, and probably already are, right? Because they understand really that it's a very, very special time to be working in customer support. The old playbook is dying, or maybe it's already dead, and the new one isn't fully written yet. Like there's a million opportunities, there's a lot of excitement for the possibilities. And this is actually, why I joined Playing, to be honest. Like I've been consulting for the last couple of years and talking to so many support leaders, so many startup founders, and the story is kind of always the same. It starts with like, we have this tool, but it doesn't really work for what we need. And I find that it's because customer support needs are just evolving really, really fast, and they're different from, business to business. The way I ran support at Loom is different than the way you run it at Gem, for example. And that's very, very okay. And I think that we should care about different metrics. We should care about different workflows, different outcomes, because at the end of the day, like we have different customers, and the Loom product and the Gem product are different, right? So they're not the same product, not the same business. And so for me, it's really, really interesting that every support tool out there is telling leaders how to like run their function. And that also creates that anxiety. It feeds into this nervousness because like people don't know really what the next step is, right? There's a lot of pressure towards, here's a new thing that you should adopt, but there's no clarity around the why, the results, and like what the next steps are. Because like blanket solutions don't really work. And I think like the best teams are the ones who are really thinking outside of these guardrails and just like extending their powers.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing to observe. This is true in every function with AI, right? Is you're on
Yeah,
LinkedIn and you see someone has built something, and in one hand that could be inspiration, but and the other, um, you're just going to see so many data points as to what is possible. It might
right.
not be the right thing for you to be spending time on, myself included. Um, is there any advice that you said you've talked to leaders about this throughout your consulting days, and as you think about it at Plane, is it really starting with like, here's the foundation, what are the foundational like pillars that need to be mature before I can think about all these other things? Is that really where folks should be starting?
I think so, honestly. I try to kind of just like reverse engineer from the outcome that is desired, right? Like there's no one solution fits every single business. Like again, like every single support team is different, much less the product or the business. And so I think like it's really important for anyone leading a support team or trying to build one from scratch to like start asking as many questions as possible, like what would our success look like if we did this instead of this, like what would be the results, like if we wanted this to never be an issue again, what would we have to do, right? If we removed this percentage of technical issues, like what would our contact rate look like? And it depends on the maturity of the org as well, and like how much you care about your customers is also something, right? Because a lot of people don't care that much about like, giving fast response or improving the quality. Like different metrics kind of mean that you optimize for different things. And so I think like at the end of the day, it just comes down to what do you care about? What does the business care about? What would make your customers the most successful with your product? And then try to optimize for that and just try to like reverse engineer from like an optimal state.
Yeah, I part of that, we've gone through that at Jam as well, of just starting with the basics of like, what are people asking us? Let's look at the top five things. How we look at where that information answers might be more clear, more obvious, and like let's start to look at the impact of changing our knowledge base or in product things. Like, there's so many different ways to do that, but it does feel like, at least for us, you start with a little bit of just blocking and tackling on specific problems, and that helped kind of feel out the space of like, okay, if this were programmatic, what would those
Exactly.
things look like? Um, Related to that, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, is you can do all this experimentation, and I feel like there's a good amount, there's a right amount, and then there's like experimentation sprawl to some degree. And I'm curious like how you experiment well, but also like how do you work with other teams in that? The one that naturally comes to mind for us as we think about like technical issues, for example, is with our engineering counterparts. And so I'm curious, like, as you're experimenting, how do you do that well with bringing your engineers into the tent, so to speak? Or, yeah, how do you think about working with engineering in this way?
That's a really, really good question. There's a lot to cover here, I think. And part of it is the fact that I don't think that support engineering like needs essentially like better collaboration. Like I feel like these two teams have been collaborating for years now, and that's been kind of like the narrative is like collaboration between support team, like close the feedback loop, support escalates to engineer, engineering is going to fix the issues. But at the end of the day, um, we're working on different like realities, right? We have different metrics, we have different goals, we have different systems, and so we're kind of like in isolation, working and trying to like advance our individual workloads in different ways. And so I think that there needs to be a different type of approach here where we're creating context or we're working in the same type of platform with the same shared goals, with the same shared mission, so that there's a lot more context sharing in real time. And you asked a really good question, which is like how to work with, those engineering teams. And um, I think one thing is that you can ask every day and that I like to ask is like, how can I make my engineering team's life easier, right? And then start from there. Maybe, we can ask questions like, what are the goals that the eng team has for the quarter? And as a support leader, you can say, okay, well, maybe let's see if we have some overlap with our top trending bugs, and then we can align with those. So I think it's a matter of like clear communication, value presentation. So if you fix this bug, this directly impacts your performance in engineering or as an engineering by X. And I think this change is not easy to initiate like at all. I think the first steps is really what matters. And sometimes you have to sacrifice a little bit as a support leader to really kind of align with that. But I feel like that initial investment like really, really helps. And it helps you show up as a partner, right? It helps you align with the PDE teams. It helps you, fight for that seat at the table because they're seeing you as a partner in crime, kind of, you're earning their trust and their or your credibility is increasing, and things just become easy, or hopefully.
Yeah, there's like three examples that already come to mind at Jam of exactly what you
Amazing.
said of like, yes, focus on the tickets that are most common for customers, but if then you look internal and say, of the ones that make it to engineering, what is taking the most time? What else
Exactly.
can we do to like simplify that? I think is such a nice way to introduce this kind of evolution of the working relationship with engineering. Is that a, do you feel like you start honestly just kind of like executing on those and acting as if that's the goal, and then from there you're kind of layering in a broader conversation with engineering leadership to say, hey, how do we do more of this, or is there an upfront conversation you're having, or yeah, how do you think you step into this kind of new way of working with them?
It's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think that the best support leaders out there are not thinking of this as something extra that they have to do. It's something that is just, they feel it's right to do, right? They feel like they can be a multiplier for the work of the engineering team, not just them, the product team, the marketing team, the sales team, the success team, right? But specifically around the engineering team, like I feel like engineers really only hear from support when things go wrong, right? So we can tell them, like, hey, this is also working. This is great. You can help them validate assumptions with real customer data. We can debug flows with them. We can help them understand if they actually, solve the problem. We should be giving them kudos for their work, right? They need some love too. Engineers need some love too. And I think it just comes from this place of, hey, I can actually be a multiplier for their work. I can help them achieve their goals as well. And so, for example, with my team at Loom, I have to always give them like a huge shout out specifically to the support engineers who basically like they were working so hard to make everyone's life so much easier. They would go into any troubleshooting with the goal of not just like fixing the issue, but like actually fixing the issue forever. And so each case that they handled like wasn't just a debug or a solve, like it turned into research, and that data would then be used to inform our voice of the customer reporting. And that meant that the engineering team, they trusted and they respected the support engineers. And actually, in fact, like one of them ended up being promoted into the engineering team. And so I think that that's really, really important. And just like having this mindset of and having a shared mission between these two teams, because the more we overlap, the more everyone wins, including the customer and the business.
Yeah, there's just there's so many opportunities for that, and we're catching ourselves coming into 2026. I'm curious if you were working today as a support leader, thinking like, hey, what does Q1 look like? What are three ways that we can celebrate wins with engineers? Like when we look back on Q1, I'm picking up a few examples from here, but I'm curious if there are those. Do you have to create those intentional spaces together where, like, to your point, support engineers kind of have this specific solution. But are there specific spaces you have to create where those teams intersect, or is it just more mindfulness of the spaces that already exist?
It's a really good question. I definitely think that there's some sort of like weird artificial divide happening right now. It's like support engineering, support does customer facing engineering, does only like technical fixes and development. But I do think like that needs to change. I think that actually like 2026, I think it's going to be the year as a support engineer. And I think that's really where the magic might happen. You know, there's more and more support engineers being posted every single day. And that tells me, just looking at data, that there's a shift happening already. Like companies are realizing that they need their support teams to become more technical. And I truly believe that this is going to be a role that's going to really, really, truly define how modern support gets done, right? And I think that this is already happening, you know, AI taking the tier one type of work. What's left is more technical, more complex. Doesn't mean that everyone has to be an engineer, but it really will help if people speak the language, and we can really make sure that support and engineering are overlapping as much as possible so that we can create the best possible product and really experience for our customers. In terms of being mindful about that space, that's a really great point. I think that we have to be, and I think it comes back to the support leaders to build that into like team meetings, into the way that we communicate on Slack, into you know, every single thing that we do. Really, is like we should be asking ourselves like, what is engineering going to be doing about this? Like, what are the priorities? How can we be multiplier for them? And try to bridge that gap as much as we possibly can in 2026. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, and support and engineering is going to become, or they're going to become, a lot more close together, I would say.
Well, that is a good place to leave it. I guess the last question for you is, obviously, I'm a big fan of yours and follow a lot of what
Likewise.
you're sharing on social. Where can people find you, more about playing? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on LinkedIn, as you know. So feel free to stop by and give a follow. Hopefully, what I have been sharing aligns with you know, your goals for 2026. And check us out at plane.com. We're building the support platform of the future. If that interests you, give me a shout and we can talk a little bit more too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Susanna.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.